I'm here today with Lydia Wylie-Kellerman. She's a writer, editor, activist, and mother. She's the editor of G's magazine, which explores the intersection of activism, art, and spirit, and is the co-founder and curator of the Radical Discipleship blog. Lydia's writing has appeared in Sojourners, Red Letter Christians, and various Catholic worker papers. She is a contributor to multiple books, lives with her partner and 2 boys in Detroit, Michigan. Lydia has also just come out with a new book, an anthology called The Sandbox Revolution, Raising Kids for a Just World. So Lydia, it's really wonderful to have you here with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Brian.
So why don't you tell people a little bit more about your background before we get into the book?
Sure. Yeah, my life is sort of a woven tapestry of raising my 2 boys who are 8 and 5, doing community and neighborhood work, activism work in Detroit, as well as writing and editing. I live in the same neighborhood that I grew up in Detroit, and my dad and sister are both still on the block. And I was raised as part of the Catholic worker community in Detroit, and raised by both my parents were writers and activists. And I think there is certainly a way in which this book comes out of deep gratitude for the ways that I was raised, and asking questions about what it means to be raising kids now. And then the other sort of main part of my work is with G's magazine, the editor there, which is a quarterly print magazine at the intersection of art, activism, and faith. We often talk about G's as hoping to be a prophetic voice for the institutional church and a pastoral voice for those who are laboring on the front lines of social change.
Very cool. It sounds like a very interesting effort.
It's a great fun. I'm so grateful to be doing it.
Very cool. So how did this new book come about?
Yeah, I think I began dreaming this book in the long nights of sleep deprivation with the baby, and also the long days of swings and sandboxes with toddlers. And I think feeling really exhausted and also really lonely, and also looking at the world that we live in and the future that our kids are walking into, and just feeling like I could weep. That I was really hungry for community and also hungry for stories. I was longing for dreaming and imagination about how we raise kids to work for justice and to fight for the future on this earth. And so I had the amazing gift of calling together a circle of people, and to ask some questions and say, tell me some stories. And I think that in so many ways, these questions just sort of live in me all the time. Questions like, how do we as parents cultivate in our children a love for the earth, a commitment to nonviolence? Where do we place our bodies to teach them that resistance is crucial and change is possible? What are the really practical practices that we hold as a family that encourage our kids to work with their hands and honor their hearts and nurture their spirits? And so, I reached out to folks who I love and admire, and said, tell some stories that are vulnerable and honest and chances at imagination and dreaming. And now I have this beautiful book in my hands that's a real gift of collective wisdom, that is wrestling with these questions and also reminding us of the sacredness that it is to raise children.
So the book is coming out actually tomorrow as we record this, March 30th, 2021, from Broadleaf Books. How many people contributed to it? How many authors are there that are part of this book?
Had about 15 contributors.
Okay, and you basically just reached out to them and talked to them about this idea?
Yeah, I actually had a grant through Louisville Institute, which made the whole process of the book, I think, an opportunity for building community as part of the process. So one of the things that actually got to include was that we had a retreat together. And so we started doing some of our drafting writing, and then we gathered many of the contributors together to do collective writing, to vision what our values were, to offer some accountability. And yeah, so I think there's been a sense of both we're writing, but there's also community building that has been part of it as well.
So what is the content like? Kind of how is it formed?
Yeah, so the book is divided into 3 sections, and the first section is called The Nitty-Gritty Decisions as Radical Practices. And that section sort of dives into the everyday decisions we make all the time in raising kids and offers them as an opportunity to think more radically. So these chapters include everything from how we define family, where we live, where we send our kids to school, how we talk about or spend money, what spirituality looks like. All of these are decisions we're making all the time. And often, the questions are so personal that we often keep them really private. And I think that there's an opportunity here because all of those decisions have really political ramifications, and they live in the realities of the systems around us. So there's an invitation to bring those questions into a communal context and to say, we kind of need one another to wrestle with some of these questions and to dream about them. The second section of the book is on confronting the isms in our family. So this section dives into everything from sexism, racism, ableism, patriarchy, white supremacy, and the ways that these sneak up at our dining room tables. And they get embedded in our families in all sorts of ways. And so there's an opportunity in these chapters. That's just a real beautiful invitation to engage these conversations head on, early and often. And the last section is on reclaiming community. And I really think that's the greatest gift that we can give kids and ourselves is community. I think we're really hungry for it. And there's a million ways to do that. And so there's, again, an invitation to be dreaming about how we can support one another in this work. Each chapter is beautiful, and the diversity of voices and experiences. The chapters are written by parents and grandparents and people who are just pregnant with their first kid, pastors, teachers, organizers, artists, gardeners, activists, a real diversity and a beautiful tenderness through it all.
So would you say the target audience for the book is progressive Christians with young children?
I think so. I think my hope is that it's wider than that as well. I think it's definitely most useful and practical for parents, but I also want to widen that definition a little bit too, to say that all of us, whether we have kids or not, especially if we're committed to justice, that we're thinking about the future, and whether we're giving bottles in the middle of the night or we're marching in the streets, it's a way of loving the children and the future generations to come. So I think we all have that commitment. And I think it only serves our kids if we broaden the definitions of family and think about all the ways that intergenerational hands can lay hands on kids, whether you have your own kids or not, that there's something really beautiful in broadening our definitions of the nuclear family. So I hope, and I think that there are lots of ways that if you don't have kids, that this book can certainly be there for you. I think it also dives into sort of how we all were raised and thinking about that both with gratitude and also seeing the ways that intergenerational trauma or pain can also be in us. So I think there's a wide range, but it's definitely most practical and useful, I think, for folks who are some way deeply invested in the lives of children right now.
What would you hope that people most take away from the book?
I think that in so many ways this project has been completely selfish. That it has been just total gift for me. And I know that for myself, that every single chapter has in some way seeped into the cracks of my life. In some ways, it's changed the patterns that we have. It's offered really great questions for my partner, Aaron, and I, that we have really dived into discernment questions that have arisen out of the book. And even just the words that I speak to my kids out, I can trace back to some of the chapters in this book. So I think that there's real practical wisdom and creativity in the book, and then it can sort of be picked up as needed and when needed in between loads of laundry and tantrums, that it's sort of there each step of the way as we need it. But the other thing that I really think about in this moment, and what I hope that folks take away, is that I never imagined that this book would land during a global pandemic. And I never imagined how tired parents would be. I think that parenting is always really exhausting, but pandemic parenting is something I never could have imagined. And from the earliest dreams of this book, I've been really, really clear that I don't want to make a book that says, here's the right way to do something, or in any way tells parents that they're not doing enough. That we're all doing enough, and we're all muddling through. And I really hope these pages are company for that. That it's bits of stories and wisdom and imagination and joy, and a real reminder that we're not alone in our hungers for justice and in the questions that we're carrying.
So you obviously had to work on the book for a couple of years before, it came out. What are some of the things that have changed during that period of time?
Yeah, I'm learning this both at G's as well, and my just sort of work of editing in general is just sort of leaning into this mystery of time in the publishing world, that you write something in one historical moment and it lands in another one. And there's a mystery in that. We edited the final chapters of the book and sent them off to the publisher just as the pandemic hit. I just remember thinking, like, the whole world has changed. How can we not have the pandemic written into these pages? And when I got back the proofs, I was trying to figure out a few places to stick it in. And then the proofs came back, and it was a couple weeks after George Floyd was murdered, and there were uprisings for racial justice all around the country. And I felt like, how can this not be in the book? And now, we land again in a time, right, still weeks after a Capitol insurrection, and we're seeing a legacy of the way that violence of white supremacy is wrapped up with Christianity and nationalism. And all of these moments around us are questions that are raised in our own parenting. And I know that especially for me in this moment, as a white mom who identifies as Christian and who's raising two white boys, these beg serious questions for my parenting. And I want to take those really seriously. So I think there's ways in which the faces and places of these struggles keep changing, but they're also the same struggles that we've been resisting for a long time. That so much of these are really questions about what it means to live humanly. And our work is to sort of hold those questions vulnerably and seriously, and to keep asking them. I also feel like more and more I learn that a book is never finished. It's never perfect, and it's never finished, and you send it out into the world. And there's just so many, all of us who are loving kids in one way or another are just doing really amazing work. And so for every contributor in this book, there were 6 more that I wanted to ask. But there's so many stories and voices to uplift in this work. And we're all still learning. And I hope that the book lands as a real gift of company and wisdom and compassion. And I'm grateful that we all keep writing the next chapters with our lives. And I hope we can keep sharing them with one another and encouraging one another with them.
Well, speaking of which, I'm going to ask you if you had any plans for a follow-on book.
I don't at this point. I'm excited to dream that. I think my heart in a lot of ways is around climate crisis. And in a lot of ways, that's where my kids' hearts are leading me more and more. I think I've been learning that more and more as a parent. And as I think about justice is how we need to let our kids lead and let them change us. And my 8-year-old especially is just feeling the deep grief and rage around climate and really pushing us to make changes in our lives, and thinking about if we honor that and listen to that and encourage and nurture in him that that pain and intimacy and desire, that I think that it'll change the shape of his life and change ours. So I don't know exactly where that'll take me, but I do think that there's something in that and something stirring. And I love getting a chance to write, and I love getting a chance to gather stories. So I hope there'll be more, but I don't know yet what it will be.
Well, there's plenty of time for that. I think, now you've got to focus on the one that's just coming out. So I can certainly relate to that. But
yes.
I hope it goes well.
Thank you.
It's a really neat book, and I think will provoke quite a bit of thought, which is a wonderful thing. So again, the name of the book, why don't you let everybody know again what it is? And
yes, it's the Sandbox Revolution, Raising Kids for a Just World. And we've got a website that has other resources as well, the sandboxrevolution.com. There's also a study guide there, as well as a list of children's book resources, so ways to keep engaging this with wider circles.
Excellent. Well, congratulations on it, and I really hope that it turns out well. Thanks, Lydia.
Thanks so much, Brian. Really appreciate you.
Well, thanks for doing so much work to create this and for telling us about it.
Thank you.